What's up, guys? How are you? Good. Just got back from snowboarding. Nice seeing in Brighton. Really amazing. Highly recommend it. Just getting back to film this episode of 7 Habits and really excited about it. Today's section is literally one of the most extremely powerful sections that I've ever read. One of the most powerful concepts that I've ever read. Last episode we talked about the paradigm and what a paradigm is and what it means for us as we examine our own paradigms and then test them against reality. Today we're going to go over the power of a paradigm shift. This is where it gets good, where you shift from one paradigm to a next, and the kind of revolutionary changes in quantum, significant and meaningful changes that can occur in someone's life should they choose to apply this. So I'm just going to hop right into it. It says here, the power of a paradigm shift. Perhaps the most important insight to be gained from the perception demonstration is in the area of paradigm shifting, what we might call the aha experience. When someone finally sees the composite picture in another way, the more bound a person is by the initial perception, the more powerful the aha experience is. It's as though a light were suddenly turned on inside. The term paradigm shift was introduced by Thomas Kuhn in his highly influential landmark book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Kuhn shows that almost every significant breakthrough in the field of scientific endeavor is first a break with tradition, with old ways of thinking, with old paradigms. So what they're saying here is he's saying that a paradigm shift occurs when there's this aha moment, when someone all of a sudden sees the same situation or the same circumstance, but from a different angle, from a different light, or more light is turned on to the scenario or the circumstances, and people see things in a different light. And so Thomas Kuhn here kind of coins this phrase, a paradigm shift, and how every scientific breakthrough was dealt with this so-called idea of a paradigm shift, and how people put away old ways of thinking and old paradigms and developed new ways of thinking. And we're going to go over a couple of those here that will explain it. So for Ptolemy, the great Egyptian astronomer, the Earth was like the center of the universe. But Copernicus created a paradigm shift and a great deal of resistance and persecution as well by placing the sun at the center. And suddenly, everything took on a different interpretation, which is so very accurate. With the geocentric model of the universe, placing the Earth at the center, it was a good start, but there were still a lot of discrepancies in the way the planets moved, in the way the asteroid belt moved, comets, moons. Things didn't really add up 100% at the time. It wasn't 100% predictable. And then when Copernicus introduced the heliocentric system, or placing the sun at the center, everything changed and worked actually. But since it was such a new way of thinking, people pushed back on it. But that's an example of a paradigm shift. Was putting away old things, old ways of thinking, and establishing and developing new ways of thinking. Another one is between Newton and Einstein. It says here, the Newtonian model of physics was a clockwork paradigm and is still the basis of modern engineering, but it was only partial. It was incomplete. So the scientific world was revolutionized by the Einstein paradigm, the relativity paradigm, which had much higher predictive and explanatory value. So essentially the Einsteinian paradigm with the theory of relativity predicted the universe and its laws way more efficiently or effectively than the Newtonian model of physics did. Another one is the germ theory. It says here, until the germ theory was developed, a high percentage of women and children died during childbirth, and no one could understand why. In military skirmishes, more men were dying from small wounds and diseases than from the major traumas on the front lines. But as soon as the germ theory was developed, a whole new paradigm, a better, improved way of understanding, what was happening made dramatic, significant medical improvement possible. So like once people understood what germs were and like what they did to people, and that was like a root cause of infection and death, then and only then was medical technology improved upon. So what I'm getting from this is that paradigms will lead to an understanding of the world and how we view that world. And so the importance and the criticalness and the essential value of examining those paradigms, of questioning our assumptions, will make quantum leaps of change in our current life. For example, like the foods that we eat. Like why do we eat fast food? Like why do we not make our own food at home as much anymore? Or why exercise for 30 minutes instead of 45 minutes? Just questioning our assumptions, like why do we play this video game over this other video game? Or why do we even play video games, right? Or certain people that you hang out with, right? Like why do you hang out with them, or why don't you hang out with a certain person? Why haven't you made that phone call yet, or sent that text message, or done that task that you know that you should do? Or why have you done that task, right? And so like just questioning our assumptions, questioning our inner paradigms and how we view the world can create quantum changes in our lives, and it can create like our inner value, and we can develop more inner security because we know why we're doing the things that we're doing. He goes on to say that the United States today is the fruit of a paradigm shift. The traditional concept of government for centuries had been a monarchy, the divine right of kings. But then a different paradigm was developed, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And a constitutional democracy was born, unleashing tremendous human energy and ingenuity, and creating a standard of living, of freedom and liberty, of influence and hope unequaled in the history of the world. The U.S. is such a unique country in the way it operates, and especially back in the 1700s when it was organized and developed. It was a revolutionary way of doing government that no one else had ever done in the past. And so it was a abandoning of tradition, of old ways of doing things, and adopting new and better paradigms that would serve their purpose of having these freedoms. Because they ran away because of freedom, mainly because of freedom of religion, but also there wasn't a lot of space back home, and so there was a lot of land out here. So lots of different reasons, but it was also just to like get a lot of freedom, which is what our whole government is based off of, And so this just makes me think of, again, like little things in our lives. Like these are like kind of big paradigm shifts. But what about like in our own lives, right? Like how do you view your family members? How do you view your wife or your husband, your kids? How do you view them? How do you view strangers? Do you view them as threats or as your best friends, or just as nobodies? Like what's your paradigm on that, and what's the actual truth? Just some things to think about. Stephen Covey says here, not all paradigm shifts are in positive directions. As we have observed, the shift from the character ethic to the personality ethic has drawn us away from the very roots that nourish true success and happiness. So he's saying that paradigm shifts don't always have to be positive, but that we can actually create negative paradigm shifts and go back into a state of, or just go into a state that's not as effective. That's ultimately going to lead us away from true success and happiness, such as like laziness, right? Like viewing work as not important and sitting on the couch all day. Well, it's like, yeah, it's probably not the best thing that you could do. But whether they shift us in positive or negative directions, whether they are instantaneous or developmental, paradigm shifts move us from one way of seeing the world to another. And so those shifts create powerful change. Our paradigms, whether they're like correct or incorrect, they're the sources of our attitudes and behaviors. which means that they're ultimately the sources of our relationships with others. So this is like a very, very powerful concept here, that the way that we view the world, right? So paradigm shifts move us from one way of seeing the world to another. Now, out of our paradigms flow our behaviors and our attitudes. Let me repeat that. Out of our paradigms flow our behaviors and our attitudes. As human beings, we act with integrity and a wholeness to the paradigms that we have. We do. We will always act in accordance with how we see the world. So what that says is that how we view other people, out of that paradigm will flow our behaviors and our attitudes, which will ultimately affect the quality and the quantity of relationships that we have with people and with others. And relationships is where the true joy and happiness comes from life. That's where the most meaningful contributions can be made and the most joy can be found is in the relationships with other people. Stephen Covey then continues to talk about a paradigm shift that he had on a subway train. That really explains this like not only his attitudes and behavior shifted, but also like how he felt on the inside changed. So check this out. Pay attention here. He says, I remember a mini paradigm shift I experienced one Sunday morning on a subway in New York. People were sitting quietly, some reading newspapers, some lost in thought, some resting with their eyes closed. It was a calm, peaceful scene. Then suddenly, a man and his children entered the subway car. The children were so loud and rambunctious that instantly the whole climate changed. The man sat down next to me and closed his eyes, apparently oblivious to the situation. The children are yelling back and forth, throwing things, even grabbing people's papers. It was very disturbing. And yet the man sitting next to me did absolutely nothing. It was difficult not to feel irritated. I could not believe that he could be so insensitive as to let his children run wild like that and do nothing about it, taking no responsibility at all. It was easy to see that everyone else on the subway felt irritated too. So finally, with what I felt was unusual patience and restraint, I turned to him and said, Sir, your children are really disturbing a lot of people. I wonder if you couldn't control them a little more. The man lifted his gaze as if to come to a consciousness of the situation for the first time, and said softly, Oh, you're right. I guess I should do something about it. We just came from the hospital where their mother died about an hour ago. I don't know what to think, and I guess they don't know how to handle it either. Pretty wild, right? Can you imagine the shift in how Stephen Covey felt? The irritation disappears and is flooded with compassion and love for this man. All of a sudden, the children aren't important. The children don't matter. Like, you actually don't care how rambunctious the children are. You don't. The only thing you care about in that moment with that paradigm shift is that man and the pain that he is going through after having lost his loved one, his dear wife. Stephen Covey says, Can you imagine what I felt at that moment? My paradigm shifted. Suddenly, I saw things differently. And because I saw differently, I thought differently, I felt differently, and I behaved differently. My irritation vanished. I didn't have to worry about controlling my attitude or my behavior. My heart was filled with the man's pain. Feelings of sympathy and compassion flowed freely. Your wife just died. Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you tell me about it? What can I do to help? Everything changed in an instant, which is so true. That's why paradigms create such quantum change, because everything changes in an instant. It creates a whole new interpretation of the environment, of the situation. It creates an entirely new way of thinking, of perspective, of attitude. It creates almost a whole new dimension to the situation as more light is shed. Pretty cool stuff. And so he's going to talk a little bit about how we can actually create our own paradigm shifts. So check this out. He says, many people experience a similar fundamental shift in thinking when they face a life-threatening crisis and suddenly see their priorities in a different light. Like if you're about to die, your priorities are going to change. Your priorities on your deathbed are probably going to be a little bit different than your priorities when your 20s. They shouldn't be. They should be the same. But a lot of times it's not the case. Or when they suddenly step into a new role, such as that of a husband or wife, parent or grandparent, manager or leader. Like a new job, if a child is born, like those are moments when you really like reflect on your life, and it makes you question your assumptions and question and examine your own paradigms. It says, we could spend weeks, months, even years laboring with the personality ethic, trying to change our attitudes and behaviors, and not even begin to approach the phenomenon of change that occurs spontaneously when we see things differently. So yeah, he's saying like we could spend so much time working on attitude and behavior and not even realize the potential of instantaneous and massive change that happens when you just shift your paradigm. It becomes obvious that if we want to make relatively minor changes in our lives, we can perhaps appropriately focus on our attitudes and behaviors. But if we want to make significant quantum change, we need to work on our basic paradigms. In the words of Thoreau, for every 1,000 hacking at the leaves of evil, there is one striking at the root. That's so good, guys. That's so good. Striking at the root. Like, that's the paradigm. That's what this is all about. I know I've been drilling this in and pretty much saying the same thing over and over and over and over again. At least that's also how I feel about it, but it's literally true. It's so true. We can only achieve quantum improvements in our lives as we quit hacking at the leaves of attitude and behavior and get to work on the root, the paradigms from which our attitudes and behaviors flow. This book is called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And that's what I love about this section right here about paradigm shift, is because it introduces this idea of working on the roots of problems, not on the branches or the leaves or the twigs. But if you want good fruit, don't prune and water the branches. Water the roots of the tree. If the roots are healthy, you're going to get good fruit. And so essentially, that's what Stephen Covey is saying here is, look, let's take a step back. Yes, behavior is important. Yes, attitude is even important. But more important and more effective to create change in our lives is to look at our basic paradigms from which those behaviors and attitudes flow out of. So guys, take this seriously. Hopefully you've been able to kind of re-examine your own paradigms in your own life on how you view your job, on how you view books, how you view other people's ideas, how you view your coworkers, how you view your families, kids, spouse, whatever it is. Just question your assumptions. Examine your paradigms. And then try to find correct and accurate paradigms that will accurately describe your life or accurately describe the world around you. Thank you guys. Have a great night. Love you.